At the end of every episode of The Gilded Age recently, I'm finishing it just being more and more shocked. George Russell has been shot, and it seems like the Russell family could be torn apart in more ways than one. This episode was all about Bertha being pushed out of the family, secrets rising to the surface with the likes of Ward McCallister's book hitting the shelf, Peggy Scott's past being revealed, Larry's night at the Haymarket, and also Oscar with the deep sense of love that he had for John Adams also being on the cusp of being shared. With only one episode left in this season, will George Russell die? Will Marian get back together? And will Peggy and Dr Kirkland get their happy ending? Well, let's break down this week's episode and discuss everything that there was to take away from it. Here is The Gilded Age Season 3, Episode 7, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. George Russell. Well, I think we all know who's behind the attack on George. The cockroach with 1,000 lives, Clay. Clay showed his true colours following the both of them parting ways a couple of episodes back, and he became enemy number one of George's following the fact that he tried to go against him. With Larry returning from Arizona and securing Morenci, its land and the mines that were underneath it, which were filled with tens of millions of dollars worth of copper, George was back on top, and he managed to secure the deal with the Merricks and also JP Morgan to get the railway built, showing that Clay was the losing horse and that he was a finished man in the industry and also in New York as well. Clay called out how George wouldn't be able to get rid of him that easily, and in the final moments when George was getting ready to be taken to the club, somebody arrived and said how there was a delivery. From there, the person fired his weapon at the two people that were inside of George's office, and then the gunman then proceeded to fire at George, implying he'd been shot and that he could well be dead. When George and Clay parted ways, one of the final things that George said to Clay was how he originally wanted him to shoot the workers at the mill, so it feels like that could be where he got the idea from. One would have to assume that it was Clay that hired this person to do that, because he was the only person that had a vendetta against George following him humiliating him and essentially ending his career. So we just have to hope that George manages to pull through and he didn't get hit anywhere that could be too damaging. When looking at the two real-life people that George Russell is based on, William K. Vanderbilt and also Jay Gould, neither of them were shot at any point, so this is something that the show has integrated into the story themselves. What I found particularly interesting in this episode was how distant George had grown from Bertha, and how the folly that she was engaging in was something that he grew to no longer care about. The book that Ward released, which had essentially damaged the names of people in high society, including his, was something that he didn't care about in the slightest. So it really highlighted how he didn't care for the societal ladder at all, and that he just cared about the family, the businesses, and making sure that he had the money to live the life that he had. He was enjoying seeing Larry be successful just like him in saving the family. And this shot here where Bertha was in the background and she was trying to tell them both about how she was going to host the ball was something that just fell on deaf ears. So Bertha really is undergoing a crisis at the moment. Whilst her family life is failing because nobody allies with her and they essentially view her as the enemy, her ascension to becoming the face of high society because Mrs. Astor has essentially handed it to her on a plate is something where it feels like she's going to thrive, and the talk of removing the ban on divorced women in attendance could be because she thinks she might end up as one. Oscar. Oscar's story is one that was just utterly heartbreaking to watch in this episode. We saw that following John Adams being hit by the horse and cart in the previous episode, he did sadly perish, and Oscar was only able to grieve in private. He wasn't able to grieve publicly in the way that he wanted to because, as we saw, being gay wasn't accepted in society back then. Even Oscar's own mother found it difficult to come to terms with the idea that John Adams was more than just a good friend of Oscar's. However, with Oscar being left the house by the lake in John's will, that essentially triggered the emotional outburst that he had when he returned home. This was such a well-performed scene, and it was shattering just watching him break down. Marian knew, Ada knew, and I think even Agnes knew. But seeing both Marian and Ada protect Oscar, even though they shouldn't need to, it just showed the levels of care that they had towards him. With Marian going to Oscar's room to tell him that she was aware that John and Oscar were lovers and that they had a deep connection, her just being there and telling him how she wasn't going to turn her back on him was enough to provide him comfort in that moment and to feel like he wasn't truly on his own. Larry and Marian. With Larry returning back home, we saw that he received the letter that Marian left at the door, which essentially stated that she was no longer engaged to him without giving a true reason why. Now, at first, I was surprised that Marian was acting like that when there was no proof that he even did anything. However, when she started to go into detail about the fact of how she'd been let down by men in her life constantly, I kind of understood that if that's all she's ever truly known, then why would she expect anything more? But still, I feel Larry deserved the chance to find out why it was that it was called off, and then also plead his case because he didn't do anything at all. When Larry finally got to speak with her in the classroom, he revealed that he lied to her about where he was at, and he admitted that he shouldn't have done that, but he confirmed that he didn't do anything. However, during that time, Marian didn't care and still wanted to stay unengaged. With Jack looking for a home and Marian helping him search, he spoke with Marian and said to her how he didn't do anything at all with anybody, that he was with him the whole time and that they left together. Whilst I respect what Jack's doing and I want Larry and Marian to be together, I do recognise that he lied to her, which is something that he just shouldn't have done because trust being betrayed in any form is something that's always difficult to repair. Marian did look a bit more willing to return to Larry following that conversation that she had with Jack, so I do think we might well see them get back together. Gladys and the Duke. What's interesting here is that it seems like the Duke is actually catching feelings for Gladys, and the whole marriage being based around a transaction doesn't seem to matter that much to him anymore. Following Hector receiving a telegram where George said that he might not be able to pay up this month or moving forward because of the financial troubles that he was facing, he spoke with Lady Sarah and she responded and said that they'd have to send her back. But he responded to her and said, "What if I don't want to?" which showed that he was actually falling in love with her and saw her as more than money. This came to light even more when he ordered the flowers that they picked up to be put in a vase for her so that they were ready to be displayed. Plus also when he told Lady Sarah that whilst they were travelling back to the States for the ball, he asked if she'd move out of the property and find a new home in London of her own. The Duke has started to put his foot down and it's about time because now it seems like both Gladys and Hector can truly be with one another and they can explore their true feelings. No longer are they both under the thumb of Lady Sarah. She did look sad over the fact that Hector didn't want her there, as now she's losing her brother. And she'll also lose her purpose because it does seem like she enjoys the smooth running of the home. So I'm intrigued to see if Gladys and the Duke will have a happy marriage with one another. Peggy Scott and Dr. Kirkland. Now, this is where I feel we're going to get a ton of drama in the finale of Season 3. Mrs. Kirkland, somebody who we know has had it out for Peggy in her progressive way since the season began, has been looking to bring her down a peg or two and make her seem less appealing to her son, who's besotted with her. Mrs. Kirkland was having tea with Ernestine, and here she revealed to Mrs. Kirkland that Peggy had a child that died. Whilst this is an extremely upsetting subject, all Mrs. Kirkland could think about was how to weaponize it against Peggy and make her seem like somebody that wasn't good enough for her son, calling Peggy a tainted woman. With her telling Dr. Kirkland, at least in this moment he had the decency for the first time to stand up to his mother, tell her that Peggy was still a beautiful woman, that he cared for her, and that he wanted to give Peggy the opportunity to speak for herself. However, I do wonder if this is going to be too difficult for her to come back from. Mrs. Kirkland is a woman that embodies Bertha's traits in wanting to control her child like there's some kind of pawn to be played with. And I think and hope Peggy will see that if Dr. Kirkland can't stand up for her, then he doesn't deserve her. So I think there's going to be some kind of heartbreak. My review of the episode. I thought this was a fantastic episode of the show. Honestly, each week the show gets better and better, and I can't believe it concluded with the stakes being as high as what they were. George Russell could potentially die. I can't believe I'm saying those very words. And whilst that could happen, Bertha could be put in a position where she either chooses to be there for her husband, or she could choose to grasp the opportunity to rise to the top and sit on the high society throne. Seeing the backlash of Ward's book being published was something that I thought made for great entertainment, especially when he said how he invented the high societal ways and that the 400 were his. Again, like with Mrs. Kirkland and like with Bertha, he was viewing the lives as pawns in a game that he could dictate and control, so that's definitely a common theme. I'd say this episode did a really good job at making me feel bad for Bertha. Usually I don't care for her because she's dug her own grave on many different occasions, but this time round, with her being an outsider and it seeming like she was actually trying, I did feel bad when nobody cared about her. Even being blamed for the likes of Larry and Marian's engagement being called off. But I suppose it did show that if you act like an ice queen for long enough, you'll forever be the person that's referred to as one. As the episode was drawing closer to the end, I kept thinking back to last week when we had the shocking moment with John Adams, and I was questioning if there was going to be a moment like that, which we obviously got, but it was amplified even more. So I'm glad that the ending paid off for sure and hit even harder than the week before. Does anybody else just feel really happy for Jack in this show? He's one of the kindest, purest, and drama-free characters, and seeing him have success and the ability to embark on a new life just makes me happy for a character that isn't even real. Speaking of the staff, I thought the whole uncovering of Miss Andre as being the leaker was a moment of fun and excitement in an episode that was rather serious. So seeing them running around and playing detective made for a moment of lightheartedness that was definitely needed. Season 3 of The Gilded Age is the best season that the show has ever put out. I can't fault it at all really, and with the finale being just around the corner, I can't wait to see how this season's going to end. So, there you have it, The Gilded Age Season 3 Episode 7 Ending Explained.